Today is Juneteenth. Today we celebrate the gift of freedom, though delayed, ultimately not denied. Nearly 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the news of freedom came to 250,000 people in Galveston, Texas. You could say that the Absalom Jones Center here in Atlanta was founded in the very same spirit of Juneteenth. We are committed to bring the good news of God's freedom to all God's children, whether they be the descendants of those formerly enslaved or formerly slave masters. This work continues with the privilege of following Jesus, and it's what Dr. King called the upbuilding of the beloved community. To observe Juneteenth this year, the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing commends a brand new recording from Theodicy Jazz Collective in partnership with the Hendricks Chapel Choir and the Diocese of Atlanta. It's entitled A World House Revisited, a part of a 9-movement suite for jazz, octet, and choir called Love is the Way, which honors Dr. King, Desmond Tutu, and Oscar Romero. This composition is based on Dr. King's seminal essay, The World House, in which Dr. King invites us to consider the ways we would live together if we all finally understood that we share this earthly house. Each of us has a role in building a more peaceful, just, and beautiful world. This Juneteenth, let us all recommit ourselves to enlarging God's freedom work. God bless you.
I once heard someone say that the great struggle of everyday life is learning how to live together without having to live alike. If you've ever shared a home with other people, you know what this means. We try to work our way toward a rhythm that makes sense. We make our house rules and norms and try to adapt as best we can, at least in theory. Because we all know plans are one thing and practice is another. Imagination has its place, but at some point we have to deal with concrete realities. Coexistence requires a negotiation of norms, boundaries, and practices. This is how we move from merely occupying a house to inhabiting a home. I like to think this is something akin to what Martin Luther King Jr. had in mind. This world is a house, and we are the inhabitants. People of every persuasion, every journey, every destiny, here, together, in the only home we have ever known. History has marked our failures to make this house a home for one another. The halls have been filled with hatred. The windows have been stained by the distortion of discrimination. The floors soiled with the blood of the slaughtered. King is clear about this. The world has failed in its housekeeping, and the task is ours to make this house a home. We either live together or perish as fools. King was a dreamer. You have to be if you want to see a better world. That kind of world exists in our hearts before it manifests in our hands. But he knew something about nightmares too. Harry Belafonte speaks of his last conversation with King. He was troubled in his soul. There was trembling in his spirit. He spoke of the long, hard struggle for freedom, but he also spoke of his fear. Perhaps we have been integrating into a burning house. Greek mythology tells us Prometheus brought fire from the gods to humanity. History tells us humanity has set fire to the world. Humans have burned bridges, crosses, forests, bodies, all in the name of power, dominance, conquest, eradication. The world is ablaze. The house is on fire. The flames singe us and the smoke chokes us. The darkness envelops us and we stumble about for an exit. But there is no escape. Some dream of colonizing other worlds, but the moon can't save us. Spaceships can't carry us at light speed away from the failures of moral vision. Rockets will not blast us beyond our historical memory. Wherever we go, we're still human, still flawed, still flailing. Any home that human beings make is an imperfect one. But our challenge is not achieving perfection. It's pursuing compassion. It's leaning away from uncaring individualism and leaning into interdependence. It's understanding that until all of us are free, none of us are free. Earth is the only house we have, and it's on fire. It's easy to look at the flames and say, that's not my problem. It's harder to admit that even if it isn't our fault, it's still our responsibility. Before we can make this house a home, we've got to make sure it's still standing. We have to admit that our futures are intertwined with each other's. We have to put our hope and faith in the power of our combined efforts. In a world full of fire starters, we must become firefighters. How do you fight a fire? In our modern times, firefighters assemble with their masks and their suits, their hoses and their axes. They saturate flames with water and chemicals, but in the days before modern technology, people used different tactics. Before we had fire hydrants and fire engines, people carried water by hand. They called it a bucket brigade. Before firefighters arrived, anyone who was able grabbed a bucket and got moving. People would form lines from the water source to the fire. They would pass full buckets of water to throw on the flames. Then they would pass the empty buckets back to be refilled. Now I know somebody's thinking, how do you quench a world of flames with a bucket? My point is not that we need to reproduce their method. We need to embody their spirit. What is that? It's a spirit of collaboration. It's the recognition that every hand helps to lighten the load. It is the willingness to get into good trouble when you see an urgent need. It is the strength to stand in defense of those who are suffering. It's the courage to speak out when dissent is being silenced. It is the fortitude to stay true to your convictions when others might turn their backs. It's the knowledge that when everyone grabs their buckets, one drop turns into an ocean deep. There is power in the people, but it takes all of us put together. How do you stop the world from burning? Well, you certainly don't do it alone or in a single moment. It doesn't take a grand gesture. It requires a consistent effort. It's not a solo played by one great artist. It is a symphony sounded out by a full orchestra. Ella Baker said it well, strong people don't need strong leaders. What we need is to know our own strength and operate in it. The world is on fire. The house is burning down. And we can't sit quietly waiting for rain, for miracles, for would-be messiahs. Perhaps we are exactly who we have been waiting for, the ones to put out the flames. And we will do it a bucket at a time. When we break bread with the hungry, when we give shelter to the unhoused, when we sit with the wounded and afflicted, when we speak a word of hope to those in utter despair, when we organize to protest unjust laws and policies, when we treat the suffering of one as the concern of all.